Okay. So let's play another Sicilian. And we have been playing mostly the Accelerated Dragon in the speedrun. And this guy plays what's called the Rosolimo. Bishop b5. This is kind of like the Rai Lopez against the Sicilian. And if you are an Accelerated Dragon player, thank you, Broken Sloth, it's a good idea to play g6 here anyway, because that keeps things consistent. Holy smokes, SC and NES All-Star. Now, which way should we take on c6? Thank you for the 5 gifted, my man, girl. What should we take on c6 with? So we can take with the b pawn toward the center, but I'm actually going to take with the d pawn, and after the game I'll delve into the reasons for this. But basically, it's a good idea to open up our bishop, and it's also a good idea to open up the d file. Thank you, Vina Blair, for the prime. Now, we're going to play the move e5. The idea of this move is to clamp down on the center. Where should we get this knight? Okay, where should we put this knight? It blocks my bishop, and again, I will explain the opening in a lot of depth. Absolutely, we should get it to e7 for 2 reasons. First of all, we don't want to blunder the pawn. Second of all, we want to be able to play f5 later. Now, our opponent plays c3. He's not actually threatening d4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Simple counting. We can absolutely go ahead. Even if he did play d4, that would not be a problem because it would open up our bishop. Our bishop has a lot of potential energy. What do I see here? Yar, thank you. 3 months at once. Okay, so the pawn on d3 is weak. Pawn on d3 is weak. How do we attack it? Who can tell me the 2 main ways that we can pressure that pawn? There are 2 main ways. We see a weakness, we want to attack it. The first is the very brute force method. No, c4, actually, he can just take. Jebsy, thank you. Yes. First is to get the bishop to a6. Second is to double up on the d file. Let's try to do both. Q, Q, and D priming. Let's go f6. Never play f6, I hear you say. It's not a problem. He doesn't have any pieces to exploit it with. Right? It's okay to play f6 temporarily. And now, let's do the other thing. Queen d7, rook f d8 is going to be our idea to pressure the pawn on d3. I hope everything's making sense. We're playing at 2300, so I'm playing a little bit faster than usual. Because if I get into time pressure against this guy, I might land in some trouble. But hopefully everything is making sense. We're just trying to attack that pawn. If we're able to win the pawn, then guess what? His position's going to collapse. Okay, a5, we're going to go b5. Get out of c4. Now, what he's accomplished here successfully is he has managed to block in our bishop. But that's still okay. Thank you, Ryan. Okay, so what should we do? Well, actually... let me think for a second, guys. Actually, this guy tricked me a little bit here. No, his idea is to go bishop e3. That's why this is annoying. His idea is to go... Well, b4 actually might be what we want to do here. This pawn is weak, and I didn't pay enough attention to it, so let's think about this for a second. Okay. Yeah, we need to find a good move here. Okay, we're going to go queen e6, and I'll explain this after the game. We're going to go queen e6. By and large, our idea is to defend against queen b3, and now we want to prepare b4. So previously, the move b4 would not have been good because he would have had this very nasty little check on b3. Now, we are able to play b4, and we're able to combine it with the move rook f d8, attacking the rook. Why not rook a d8? Because the pawn on a7 might be hanging later, and I want to make sure the rook on 8 supervises that for now, okay? Okay, so the battle now revolves around the pawn on d4. All right, how can we go about putting maximum pressure on that pawn? And think about it this way. There's many ways to do this. We can double rooks. That's absolutely true. Let's do it. We could have also gone b3 and chased his knight away. This is a very complicated position. I don't have much time on my clock. I'm going to have to play a little bit fast. I warned you guys about this. There will be situations where I don't get a chance to explain things to the level that I want to explain it at. But right now we're going to chase his knight away. And we're going to dig a little hole for him here. And we're going to do that by going c4. We're going to bury his knight on a3. Basically, that's kind of the rationale behind this. This guy is really, really good, actually. Really good. So I'm going to have to accelerate the pace a little bit. But the bottom line here is we still want to play on the d file, and he tries to unbury his knight. Another very good move. Okay. It's a little Monka S here, but we'll be fine. No, they're good. These people are now good. Now let's improve the position of our bishop. Let's put it on a square where it's defended by a pawn. Okay, he's getting his knight to a better square. Let's do the same thing. Let's reroute our own knight to d6. Let's reroute our own knight to d6. Okay. So far, everything should be making sense. We're just sort of maneuvering our pieces to better squares, each one of us. And now let's cement our bishop with a6. I don't want to worry about this pawn being in a dark square, so let's make it defended. No, it's okay. I usually will be able to talk. This guy is extremely underrated, so I'm going to have to be... So now we're going to get the bishop to a better square. Channel no 5x, thank you for the gift. Now what's going to be our plan? Our plan is eventually going to be to pile up on the d-pawn. But before we do that, we want to make sure our pieces are on better squares. Now we're going to go knight f7 in order to open up our rooks so that they can give pressure. Okay, so he decides to open that. Which way should we take? Who can tell me which should we take, with the knight or the pawn? We should take with the, very important, not the knight actually, we should take with the pawn. The reason we shouldn't take with the knight is because it would have weakened the d4 square. Now we take the rook, and who can tell me where we put this rook? Where do we put it? d7, d6, d5, all the way to d3. We put it on this beautiful outpost. And now let's bring our bishop into the game with bishop h6. Actually, that wasn't great because of bishop e3. But you do something that wasn't great, no problem. We just bring the bishop back. It's okay. And now let's go h5 to pressure his knight. Okay, now we're starting to really put the heat on him. Another idea to consider would be c5 to lock out his bishop so it remains stranded on b6. There's a lot going on. Trust me, guys, if you can tolerate this, I'll make this worth your while. I'll make this really instructive. There's a lot of concepts to unpack. There's a lot of concepts to unpack here through the lens of this game. And now I'm going to activate the bishop. Look how I'm slowly but surely, I'm pushing him off the board. And actually, he just trapped my rook. But even that's fine. We can just sacrifice it. Yeah, this guy is actually like... I would say I am strength easily. He's I am strength easily. Okay, let's go knight g5. I'm going to sacrifice the exchange. That rook is going to be replaced with a beast of a pawn, though. And, Okay, let's go queen e6 to defend the pawn. Oh, and I blundered this. Ugh. I'm getting nervous myself. Okay, let's take. Yeah, we're going to sacrifice on h3. Yeah, these Russians are freaking good. Go back. These Russians are freaking really good. Okay, knight h3. Sacrificing the knight. If he takes it, he gets checkmated. I think maybe he knows he's playing against my speedrun account. He's bringing his A game. Okay, I'm trying to checkmate him here on h4. My knight is restricting his queen. This guy. Finding all sorts of stuff. And he wants to checkmate me now. Oh no. That's actually not good. Okay, let's get our knight back. Whew. Another really good move. Jesus. Yeah, he might just be beating me here. He's taking a long time. Now I think I'm winning because I got this beautiful passer. Look at this passer, guys. This is going to win me the game. And in the end, I'm going to just get my king around and promote. This guy was really good, I'm telling you. I really tried. This guy was like GM strength. That was like a really solid game for me, actually, too. Jeez. No, I think here he's lost because of H2. My apologies, guys. I'm sorry for not explaining stuff at the end, but let's unpack this, and that's how we'll end the stream. This will be, and we crossed 2100. Perfect. So, trust me, I'll make everything understandable. Russians are just built different. Well, yeah, this guy was just incredible. Okay. You want to do one more instead of analyzing? Well, I feel like analyzing is going to be important, though, because I know that people like me to play, but analyzing, trust me, is it's going to pay off. Okay. So accuracy was probably low because we were in time pressure. I wouldn't put too much stock in the accuracy because at the end we were both scrambling, but 80%. It was 79.1 and mine was 87.5, so I actually played really well. Jebsy B5 gifted subs, my man. Yeah, I know. I was checking the accuracy. It was 79.1 to 87.5. Okay. Which is solid for Blitz. All right. So, he plays the Rosalima, bishop b5, okay? Now, the idea of this move, yeah, it's like you're playing the Rai Lopez against the Sicilian. It became popular really in the last couple of years. It features very often at the high level. And we get this kind of position, this kind of structure. Now, there's good news and bad news for Black. There's good news and bad news for Black. The good news for Black is that I have the two bishops, and I have a nicely fianchettoed bishop. The bad news is, there is a pretty big defect in the pawn structure. The reason I didn't take BC, by the way, this is a legitimate move, is, well, you guys know that I like developing the bishop on the main diagonal. Now I'm going to have to waste another move. And also, let's go at it from the perspective of why DC is good. The reason DC is good is because in a position like this, and let me know if this doesn't make sense, you guys see how big of a clamp I have on this d4 square. This square is completely mine. That makes it very hard for him to free his position up in the center. If we do the same thing after BC, watch what's going to happen. If you go e5, right, compare this position to this position. You literally have, let me actually make the same moves. Right? You have the pawn on d7, which makes it possible for him to go d4. It's like a Morozzi bind. He goes d4 and he opens up his position. Now, a lot of people were saying, well, doesn't e5 block our own bishop? And I need to come back to the point that I always make here about chess being like an omelet at this level. I can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. I repeat that like a broken record all the time. So sometimes you need to accomplish something in chess, and that involves making one of your pieces bad. There's also a famous saying, originally formulated by a Romanian grandmaster, Mihai Shuba, who said, bad bishops defend good pawns. And that's a very profound thing to say, because the bishop itself might look bad, but it's still like Atlas holding the world on its shoulders. It's defending the pawn on e5, and the pawn on e5 is actually incredibly strong. It's a beast. So rather than looking at the bishop as one Haman Budge, as one kind of unit, think of the bishop and the pawn as one unit. Think of this as one unit. And together they're accomplishing something great. The bishop is like an extension of the pawn, or the pawn is an extension of the bishop. Thank you, the real Mr. Parrot, for 500 bits. Thank you so much. Does that make sense? So that doesn't mean you have to willy-nilly go around and make all of your pieces bad. But what it does mean is that sometimes a piece may be bad in the sense that it doesn't control a lot of squares, but it may be in charge of defending something that's important. Okay, they're a unit. They're a team. That's why we put the knight on e7. Another 500 bits. Jay Rude, my man, guys. You're spoiling me. Knight e7 because knight f6 would blunder the pawn and it would interfere with my control over d4. So knight e7, c3 castles, and d3. So c3 was not a good move because he weakens the square. Now, the pawn is weak. We have two ways to attack it. We can simply double on the d file, or we can put the bishop on a6. I actually think this was an inaccuracy. I think I should have probably started by doubling on the d file. That might have been a little bit simpler. Thank you, GM Shadow, for the prep. My opponent found a very good idea in response to it, which is to get the knight to c4 and block the bishop. Also, something I want to point out. A lot of people confuse attacking a weakness with getting rid of it. Don't play a move like c4, because that actually helps him get rid of the weakness. And that's something you got to keep straight in your mind. When you're attacking a weakness, be careful about doing it with a pawn, because that might help him actually get rid of it. So b6, bishop a6, knight c4. Now, I played f6 in order to defend pawn on e5. But there was one thing that I underestimated here. In addition to weakening the general kingside, could somebody point out to me, in the context of this position, what is the secondary weakness of the move f6? This move facilitates something that he can now do easier, and this is begins to be a headache. So not the e6 square, because he cannot, but he can't get his knight there. Remember the concept of inaccessibility. First of all, it weakens the diagonal. But second of all, what idea does it make simpler to achieve for white? Remember, yeah, good. So d4 is now easier to achieve, because the bishop is no longer controlling that square. And that's going to be a headache. In addition, it weakens the diagonal, something I also underestimated. So a4, he pushes his pawn to a5. What is his idea? He has two ideas. The first, after I go b5, is that my bishop is no longer attacking the pawn. The second is he's weakened the c5 pawn, which you can now pick off by playing bishop e3. I didn't quite, I think I underestimated this stuff. And at this point, I began to realize that the position gets really complicated. So if we go rook fd8, he counterattacks this pawn with bishop e3, and it's not easy to defend this pawn and attack this pawn at the same time. So after a5, could you go rook fd8? Yes. But here he can play queen b3, creating the possibility for a discovered check. And if you move the king, he takes the pawn. So I think I actually kind of have to go b5. So why did I play queen e6? At this point, I realized that if I play b4, he plays cb. And as many of you have hinted at, what does white have? We talked about this during the game. Yep, that's why it's all going to go on YouTube. He has the very simple move, queen b3 check. Now, some of you might look at this and say, well, that's not a problem, right? You can trade pawns. But it is a problem. We were supposed to win the pawn on d3, not exchange it. Also, this is just disgusting. We're not going to allow this. I don't want to just give up this pawn. So I played queen e6 in order to cover, once and for all, this diagonal. And what I wanted to do was reposition my rook on d8, the rook being the more weighty attacker here. Does that make sense? So he goes bishop e3, and at this point, my resources are starting to get stretched thin. So I go b4 and rook fd8. Now the difference between this scenario and this scenario is that the position is a little bit more closed, which is in my favor. If he plays bishop takes c5, I can go rook takes d3 and attack his queen and fork his pawn. This is actually good for black. So d4 by white, emphasizing the secondary problem with the move f6. And this is where things get super complicated. So let's understand this position from a broad perspective. I always like to talk about the zen of the position, or what the game is revolving around. And that makes things easier to see. What the game is revolving around is control of the d4 square. Scenario that is good for black is I win this pawn, or I'm somehow able to put enough pressure on this pawn to make it collapse. The scenario that works for white is, he's able to get to my weak pawns on the queen side, and he's able to retain his control over the center. Which is why I double rooks. That shouldn't be a mystery to anybody. Doubling rooks increases the pressure on the d4 pawn. This should also not be a mystery to anyone. How do you decide? Well, it's just visually obvious, right? I mean, look at how many attack. Look at how everything is attacking and defending the square. There's like a million sources of tension. $1, thank you. Mr. Glocks, did you get my other dono? I think I might have missed a donation. $10 from Mr. Glocks. I'm so sorry I missed that. Yeah, I would recommend playing 10 minutes if you're 1K. Thank you for the $10, Mr. Clock. Sorry for missing that. I would say 10 minutes for now. So queen c1. Why does he play this move? To unpin himself from the d-file. If I can complete the doubling of the rooks, he can take the pawn. So that's why I go b3. His knight is a defender of the pawn on d4. Therefore, we remove the knight. Okay. Yeah, so for now the game is revolving around that. Now, I don't want to play the move c takes d4. Why? Because that would open up the c file for his queen. He made a very forward-thinking move by putting his queen there. I don't want to let his queen have any access to squares, so that's why I played c4, trying to bury his knight on a3. The problem with this move is that it dries up the structure on the queen side. It opens up the diagonal for his bishop after he takes, and my own bishop on a6 is now also kind of lame. Yes, bad bishops defend good pawns, but you don't want to take that too far. So Audas potentially, but probably not now because that would be premature. So I double the rooks. He gets his knight to a better square. Now I get my bishop to a better square where it's at least protected by a pawn. Now he makes this very Rai Lopez-like maneuver, getting his knight to the queen side. I get my knight to the center, and he goes king h2, which is a very Russian school of chess move. He just like improves the position of his king. He gets it away from the potential danger zone. And I also make a Russian move, a6, reinforcing the bishop. And also, the pawn on a7 is annoying me because I could imagine a future where he takes on e5 and he can take the pawn on a7 if my rook ever leaves d7. Well, hopefully this is making sense so far. Rook e2, getting his rook to d2. He could have played rook d1 also. And bishop f8 is how I tried to solve, it's just sort of a waiting move. Well, at this point, the battle has shifted, right? The moment I played c4, the battle has shifted from the d4 pawn, which is still a hot spot, but now we enter this sort of maneuvering phase. Both of us, we sign a little ceasefire. There's no immediate threat that either side has, so there's a mutual understanding that both of us have to improve our pieces before the battle heats up again. Does that kind of make sense? So he improves his knight, I improve mine. He gets his king to a marginally better spot, improves his rook, I improve my bishop. Now I drop my knight back to f7 so that the g5 square is covered. Now here, knight takes e5 is tempting, but it would have yielded this beautiful outpost on d4, which is not what I wanted to do. Well, Tobias Chess, bishop f8, bishop h6 is not a problem. I can even trade bishops and drop my knight back to f7 with tempo. I wouldn't really mind the trade of bishops, right? So I could talk about this forever, but so bishop e6. I think he made a mistake by taking. He shouldn't have given up the d file like that. And I have now won the battle over the d file in a certain sense, right? Rook on d3 is beautiful, and now I start improving my pieces. Bishop h6. I forgot he can drop his bishop back, so we repeated moves. And instead, I went h5 in order to get his knight away from g3 and tried to push him back, run him out of the gym. Now I go c5 in order to lock his bishop out of b5. The bishop is in jail. At this point, I think black is much better, but I made a big mistake. And he found an absolutely brilliant idea. So here I played queen d6. Why get the queen to the d file? What is White's idea here? Why did he play queen e1? Like why is this necessary? And so he wants to trade rooks. This rook on d3 is like a bone in his throat. I don't want to allow him to trade rooks. I want my rook to remain on d3. But I made a very key mistake. I didn't ask myself what he wanted with this move, knight e1, knight h1. I didn't ask myself what my opponent wanted. I simply didn't realize that knight f2 was his idea. Well, rook d1 is strong because the rook on d3 is strong. I don't want to get that rook traded. I think I had a beautiful prophylactic idea here to stop knight f2, and that is the move knight g5. Who sees how knight f2 is met? Like, how is this met? The idea of knight g5, and you should immediately see the forkability of the knight and the rook, of the king and the queen, sorry. Neither of the pieces I just mentioned were correct. Rook f3. He can't take the rook because of knight takes f3. Check with the fork. And I think this would have been the correct move. But instead I played bishop h6. Well, h4, rook takes f2. The line goes on, but we won't talk about that now. And I lose the exchange. And it's important not to panic in this situation. First, I give a check on f4. I wanted to soften him up with g3 so that I can then get my knight to g5. But he correctly got his king back to h1. And I decided, okay, the good thing here is that even if he takes my rook, the rook is replaced with a pawn that is also a beast. And I can potentially support that beast by going c4. Now, why didn't I go c4 here? That is a very tempting move. Who can tell me what drawback the move c4 contains? It frees the bishop. Bishop gets out of jail. Get out of jail free card. I don't want to get the bishop out of jail. My big chance here is the fact that the bishop is in jail because that gives me the possibility of attacking his king with one of his pieces essentially incarcerated. The problem, though, is I don't have the resources necessary to guard the pawn on b3, and I panicked here. Not really. I actually found a cool idea, but I had no choice but to let his bishop out of jail with queen e6. Now, the problem is taking on d2 would not be good because my dark-squared bishop is my main attacker. I don't want to trade. But maybe I should have done that. I don't know. Queen e6. My idea here was to capture on h3, something that I did a little bit later. Knight takes h3. Knight takes h3. Why can't he take the knight? Because I played queen takes h3. Now I give another check on h2 with the bishop. And regardless of where he goes, I win his queen. And checkmate will follow soon after. So knight takes h3 is a good tactical idea. This at least wins back a pawn. And now my knight is very nicely positioned on an outpost. I further the outpost with knight e2. And now queen f6 was a very good move. What is the purpose of this move? The purpose of this move is to tie down his queen to this diagonal. Because if he moves his queen, he gets checkmate. But he found a beautiful way around it. Queen f2 is so strong. And if I do just about anything here, he gives me a check, and then another check, and he drives my king out, and that's not going to end well. So I let the bishop out of jail. That's why I played knight d4. I need to intercept the queen's access to a7. He still gave me a check. I could have probably repeated moves with a draw, but I didn't want to draw. So I was able to park my king on h6. And the reason that the game isn't over, that white is not winning, is because of this pawn. That is my biggest asset. And at this point, I decided to trade queens because he's threatening the very nasty move rook b6. Now, most people wouldn't really do this because we're down an exchange in an endgame, but I would argue that winning this is not simple at all. Again, because the pawn on d3 ties down his knight. So he can simply do nothing and make a draw, but my opponent in time pressure started to panic. The move h4 I didn't just make for no reason. I anticipated a future where I would be able to eliminate his pawn on g2, and so I preemptively advanced my passed pawn. Thank you, xa1 cap 03nx, and rook takes b5 was very panicky. He shouldn't have done that. He should have probably gone about winning this position by coming around to c3 and trying to snag the pawn on b3, slowly but surely. Not easy, but doable. But in time pressure, he sacrificed back the exchange. The position remains very unclear, but now I was able to get my knight to g2, pave the way for the pawn, and he lost on time here. So maybe white can draw by getting the king to g1, although it's very, very close. I do think black is actually maybe winning. I don't know who's winning. Maybe white is even winning. I don't know. So anyway, he lost on time here in a very unclear position. Very rich game. You could see how many stages this game had. At first, I was outplaying him. Then he found this very nice idea that introduced a lot of weaknesses in my position. The battle was revolving around the d pawn for a while. Then we locked things up. We had a maneuvering stage where we both improved our pieces. Then the position opened up again, and we had the d-file stage. Then he trapped my rook. We had a stage of the game where he was up in exchange. So many different places that we visited in this game. And I hope that I was able to at least partially clarify the motivations behind the move. It was very complex. I could talk about this for hours. But this guy played an unbelievably good game. So you can see how the higher rated you get, really this stuff is very complicated even for me. I have to fully engage with the position against players like these. And I'm capable of making misjudgments and mistakes, just like any of you guys. So hopefully this gives you a certain sense of inspiration. Like a move like b5 I played mindlessly, not realizing that, hey, I was going to pay the price for this weakness. It's just that my mistakes are maybe on a more subtle level, but that doesn't mean I don't make them, and that doesn't mean that I don't commit the same kinds of hallucinations and misjudgments that any of you guys do. So you shouldn't put anybody on a pedestal. Okay. So any questions?